people remember where they were when they heard the first moment of 9/11? He and I both know where we were because we were on the phone. It was the first season that I was going to teach a lecture course, this course. And having not done it, I thought I would phone Robert up, invite him to lunch, and ask if he had any tips before I plunged into this the next week. I phone him up. We're talking for about 2 minutes, and he says, "Oh my God, fuck, look at CNN." I said, "I don't have a TV." "What? A plane has just flown into the World Trade Center." And we're talking, and the first thing I remember saying, I don't know if you remember me saying it, it's like, no, and he said, "Another plane has done it." And the only thing I really remember saying, and I remember saying it right away, was, there's a bunch of guys in Afghanistan are going to pay for this. And everybody acted like it was a mystery for weeks without understanding exactly what the provocation was, who was going to make it, and when they were making it. And the fact was, it was there, and it was waiting, and everybody knew, and they weren't ever going to do anything about it. I also remember at the time saying, there's only one way we get this over quickly, and that's if they send in about 1,000 Special Forces and Rangers guys all dressed in black face paint with big knives and come out of those caves with a bunch of heads. And then it'll be over. Everyone will have paid up, and that'll be fair. And of course, they didn't do that. They're still engaged in the wars that they started because they had to have national wars, as opposed to say, if it's revenge, if it's tribal revenge, go and do a tribal thing. Go and, risk people, do things, be horrible, and then walk away from it all. I don't really believe that, but I do believe that it would be better than what happened, which was that everyone actually puffed up and said, this will be a national policy, and we will do these things, and we will lie about them in order to justify them. Because, of course, the justification for flying into the World Trade Center was that it would provoke those nations, that nation, to be as irrational as indeed it was. But it provoked them, and we're still harvesting the trouble of that. Now, there's a different question. In the same way, in the same phone call, or not the same phone, but the same kind of phone call, was the phone call, I'm in a restaurant with Robert and a student, Friday night, I get a call, former wife saying, "Are you hearing this news? This is horrible." I said, "What?" She says, "Oh, hundreds of people are getting massacred in Paris right now. Like it's going on." And this all felt very personal. We just got back from Paris. It was kind of horrible. And it went on. And again, I just said, "Oh, those are going to be a bunch of French guys off their heads." She says, "No, they're from ISIS." "Well, they're a bunch of French and Belgian guys off their heads." No different than the brothers who blew up the Boston Marathon 3 years ago. That is to say, they got it into their head. It seemed like a good idea. There was a rationale. They did it. It's a nasty piece of work. And you look at it, and there's only, you just say, right now, everyone's rationalizing and saying, it's ISIS, it's ISIS, it's ISIS, and it's ISIS that did Beirut, it's ISIS that knocked down the Russian plane. And it very likely is, in the same way that you understood that it was a bunch of guys in the mountains of Afghanistan plotting that actually convinced some fellows to stoke up in a lot of money and spend months figuring out how to fly airplanes and buildings in New York. But the truth is, this stuff happens all the time. It happens all the time in so many different ways that we class some of them as of national significance and something must be done about them, and we class others as horrible. Does anybody know what happened? Like, the anniversary is tomorrow, November 18th, 1977, before almost everyone. How many people were like, what is it? There'd be 38 years of age, is that right? I'm over 38, all right? There are hardly any of us, okay? But on the other hand, how many of you understand the expression to take the Kool-Aid? All right, that's what happened. Do you know what the score was? 909 for the Christians, That's one of the greatest Christian massacres in this century, right? A compelling, a charismatic American preacher named Jim Jones set up, with a lot of government grants and other things, a cooperative agricultural community in Guyana where they would make the new Jerusalem, essentially, the new place. And when a senator came down to investigate what all this was about, they very clearly understood the senator was going to go home with some bad stories. There were about 11,000 people there. They managed to compel or convince or simply force 909 of them to drink Kool-Aid laced with cyanide and die an agonizing death in the grounds for a faith that was shared by a couple billion people in the world. Nobody ever said, we've got to get those fucking Christians. You know? Nobody walked around beating up fundamentalist ministers in the street, and nobody said, okay, you're either with us or against us, and all those Christians have got to go. The sensibility is different the moment it's not one of yours. Jonestown was, what, 5 times the number of people killed in Paris this weekend? The murders in Paris will vanish in history. We'll know them forever because they're horrible. They're truly vicious and nasty. How many people died in Boston? We don't know. Significant number. People do murder, and sometimes people are... murder is the most narcissistic of all acts. It's me. This time around, 8 young men found a reason to be me and went and did it. Jonestown, it was probably about the same number who convinced 900 other people that they were right, that they win. So in the face of that one, I think, as Robert's already claimed, and he's already quoted my 2 favorite agencies, one of which is the Lord's Prayer, which is a great mantra. You don't have to be a Christian to recite that one. It's just a good prayer. And Karl Popper, whom I quite happily subscribe to. But I'd have a different authority, and then I have a question, and then I'm going to shut up. So the authority, and I have to dig it out of my pocket because I really want to get it right. So I had to check it. It's from a story called God Bless You Mr Rosewater. And the book is written by Kurt Vonnegut. And the speech takes place as a baptismal speech over a pair of twins. And it's a lifetime philosophy. Hello, babies. Welcome to Earth. It's hot in the summer and cold in the winter. It's round and wet and crowded. At the outside, babies, you've got about 100 years here. There's only one rule I know of, babies. God damn it, you've got to be kind. What does that one mean? For me, it actually only means one thing, and it's a kind of thing that you absolutely have to call up at a moment like this when you're forced to kind of take sides, which is to say, you have to decide about whatever's in front of you, whenever it's in front of you. You have to decide. You have to take responsibility for it. You have to take responsibility for your roommate or dinner or another person, because that's the only way. In some sense, to be kind is to say, I have to be thoughtful of the whole world. I have to be considerate persistently. But that doesn't mean I have to rescue the whole world. I have to deal with what's in front of me. There's 2 quotes that I'm going to put out, and I put them out as, I posit as an opposition on their way to a synthesis. And the first is from the Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu, who was a sort of civil servant who was sort of fleeing China as a political refugee, about 5,000 years ago. Do you know the dates on this, Philip? No. I think it was a lot of 2,500 years ago. Before he leaves, the border guards say, write down your wisdom. So he writes down a number of aphorisms. And one of them is simply, in the face of evil, it may be better to do nothing and so contribute no more evil to the world. And that's the first of these sort of aphorisms. And the other comes from the current Dalai Lama, who said, in the face of aggression, it may be important for you to strike back and so contribute to the enlightenment of the aggressor. Both positions seem to be appropriate, and both of them seem to call for different ideas of action. And both of them also, in some sense, say this isn't a state question, this is a personal question. It's like, where do you put yourself? And so that's where I would leave it, just to confuse everyone.
Okay. Well, okay, I'll say a few things. I was only supposed to smile. I mean, partly it's because, actually, when Robert Jan sent the invitation, I thought it was a great thing, great initiative, and I thanked him right away, and I said, yes, of course, I'll join in, and I'll come. And of course, I was working on my lecture for tomorrow, which I thought I needed to address this, so I won't address it twice, but I will go back to it. And there are a couple of things that were going through my head, because we're reading Utopia. I don't know how many of you have read it in the second year in the group. But one of the elements that I always find, when there's such an event that happens, and it feels much closer than, unfortunately, it feels much closer than a lot of terrorist acts that have been happening, or a lot of violence that's happening everywhere, but because suddenly it feels, well, it's in the middle of Paris. And I think one of the elements is looking for the villains and who's responsible for this. And I don't know if whoever has read Utopia, one of the thoughts was in the first part of Utopia by Thomas More. He's explaining why is, thinking up this place, which is no place. And part of the, explanation in the first book is, conversation between friends and talking about capital punishment for someone who would be a thief. It's like if you just steal something, is it right that you should be a capital punishment? And one of the answer, one of the suggestions is that actually it's not so much, one shouldn't look for the thief necessarily, but it's actually this is a symptom of a much larger social issue, a larger social problem, and one must be able to sort of face this rather than just looking for the one person who's the responsible, or that maybe look for the wrong authority at one point. But I think that's it was just one thought of trying to approach this with a much larger mind. The other thought that came to my mind was thinking back of where I was on September 11. And I was at university in a master's program, going to my day of seminars at McGill, and there was a small group, 12 students, and we all gathered and we talked about this. And which is also why I thought it was very good that Robert Jan sent out this invitation. And when I was thinking back of utopia or dystopia, and I was also wondering, leading up towards this heterotopia, and then all of these have to do with either another place, another time, or a breaking time. And the heterotopia I'm relating to, which is, maybe I'll explain it a bit more tomorrow, it's thinking of a space which is not necessarily singular, unilateral, where there's a number of superimpositions, just juxtapositions, where there's not just one story, but many interconnecting stories. And even though this is referring back to Michel Foucault's text on heterotopias and other spaces, he's not talking about university as one of these spaces. He's talking about other places that are sort of apart from the very categorical approaches to distinctions in our life. And then these are, in some cases, moments, like cemeteries might be one of these spaces, or times in one's life where you sort of put aside of these rhythms, pregnancy, or when death falls, or I think, just moments that take you outside of these times. And I think the possibility of actually having a conversation around one very terrible event, but where actually we're willing to consider many different facets of what this means, and not take the sort of singular unilateral approach that it seems to be taken politically in France, at least, to say that's a state of exception. And I'm not necessarily saying there's a value, well, there is a bit of a value judgment, but trying to say, the categorical, where there's so much violence, maybe you stand out, you don't contribute to it, or the categorical approach of, yes, the state of exception, closing down the borders, fighting this war, and just saying, well, what can we see that is not saying just black or white, or is not just feeding into the same process that we're thrown into. maybe these just are the two spaces that I want to put this kind of university as heterotopia, or space that we may find that heterotopic in the sense that we're able to see all of these dimensions, versus something like the state of exception, which, you know, what it is, the state of exception is really exceptional measures that are taken, but for, you know, in the preservation of security, of internal affairs, which is, you know, exactly what is being enacted now. That goes back to the French Revolution, but it always at this point where in some sense, like something is, you know, so unexpected and requires such reaction that these are no longer really pertaining to the chart, but it's originally was the Article 4 of the chart, which was enabling this country, France, to take these exceptional measures. And there was one, you know, I didn't bring all of my quotes, but at the time where these were implemented, Chateaubriand, a French author, said that he would see the possibility that the whole chart could be forfeited for the benefit of this article. And I think this is also something that I would like to keep in mind when there seems to be this notion for exceptional measures, which we've seen implemented definitely ever since the September 11th. And this notion that you'll find them. And all of that, what comes in the midst of it, which at the much larger scale of global relation and fight, you know, war on terrorism, but also deep down like fear, risk, all of these which are brought into that, I think it's always just a reminder of trying to see whether that doesn't then overtake, you know, the very values of, you know, common values of the open society or relationship, or just, what do you say,
you have to be kind, babies.
Being kind. So I think these are just the different, thoughts that came to my mind. I'll leave it at this. Philip.
Thank you for including me. I know many of you, and many of you have not yet met. And I'm looking forward to working with you in the coming years. I want to share just a very brief personal reflection and perhaps relate 2 or 3 images that I try to work into as architects, guiding me in response. And I will try to connect that to some actions of physics in the world, and then use those images to ask how you, like me, are feeling. It's difficult to put into words how I'm feeling right now when I let this act in. I can say that in every cell of my body, I feel utterly revolted, as if every cell is shrieking with a kind of hideous sense of exploding and tearing in fear and in revulsion and disgust, in the sense of being pulled inward into a spiral and a vortex of counter-reaction upon counter-reaction upon counter-reaction upon counter-reaction, fueled by leadership that would say again, as they do again, that if you are not with us, you are with them. And with that voice gathering a kind of nationhood which stands against and which creates a kind of certainty and a kind of hopeful goodness about restoring light and clarity and order. And I feel a kind of tearing guilt in not wanting to take that stand as well. At least a kind of uncertainty or fear that in my wish not to react that way, not to hit out, and not to stamp it out through strength, that I'm only sanctioning more and more and more of this. I wonder if you're like me in having been taught to be open. I think that perhaps that's something that we have in common, all of us, that we are so strongly schooled in a sense that being curious and inquiring and reaching out and sharing and being empathetic, and in practical sense, doing so by reaching out and leaving things unlocked and hoping to include. And I wonder what that kind of fundamental kind of reaching is served with in a reaction such as now seems inevitable yet again. When I think of some images from my own cultural history, I look for some kind of guidance of how I can contribute as an architect. And I think of some beautiful historical paintings that teach me about building the world. I might think of religious images, like beautiful medieval paintings of a paradise enclosed by walls that make a kind of sanctuary, with tremendous wilderness and uncertainty outside, but a kind of exquisite, condensed calm and peace and fertility inside those walls. I might think of an early Renaissance painting. I'm picturing one right now about Piero della Francesca, the flagellation of Christ. The Christian imagery is actually rather incidental because it's an image of an extraordinary gridded floor, a stone floor, on which Florentine citizens stand and converse with really quite extraordinary justice and earnestness in their postures. Again, bounded by a wall that makes the city. And then I think about some more recent images as an architect. Perhaps I might think of the Neue Staatsgalerie, Mies van der Rohe's remarkable museum in Berlin from just 60 years ago, which again is a kind of a hardened stage, a rigid floor that stretches almost forever, with the absolute minimum of walls and boundaries around it. The kind of refinement of that floor in its gridding and stone and detailing that allows everyone to gather and stand freely. And I wonder about those kinds of gestures in architecture, the way of making the world which relies on a solid floor, perhaps standing against nature or other dimensions, but certainly gathering humanity. And it makes me wonder very much about the kind of architecture that I've been schooled in and what I might respond with. I love standing on the solid ground. I love being supported. I love having parents. I love feeling that I belong. I love having the sense of certainty that the world is eternal and that I can concentrate in that certainty, in that absolute, almost unspeakably beautiful foundation, that I can concentrate on my own freedom and on relating and acting as vividly as possible with others. But I think that in those moments I need very much the kind of certainty of that stage for action which has been built for me, or which I might be able to find if I go up north or if I find myself in a clear space. But can I actually find that solid world? Except in rare moments. What is the surface of the earth that I find? If I look more closely at that surface, and if I look around, it seems as if that surface starts to tremble and show itself as the most delicate, fragile meniscus, a kind of hollow skin, even dissolving into turbulence, as if any kind of certainty that my parents are truly there, or that my nation is in fact my identity, or that the walls are closed and secure, all start to dissolve. And I wonder if this world is floating in such a fragile manner, in such a manner that I cannot even rely on nature being something that will exist in the future. If the world is floating in a way that I cannot even feel that there is actually a live future. I wonder how I can contribute to new surfaces of the world as an architect. It makes me have a certain kind of resolve of trying to create fertility and trying to create a kind of rather robust involvement. But I somehow can't take the same kind of judgment that would say those guys were French and this happens all the time, and it's important simply not to react and not to give in to the kind of counter-reaction that will allow some bombing and some rituals to seal it over again. Somehow I want to be changed by this. I don't think I can say more than that. I want very much to leave this as a question. And I wonder if I can simply ask how you're feeling about it.
We have a microphone which can go around, so Talia, you're
Nobody wants to be first. Fair enough.
I feel like I can talk without it, but...
Oh,
true, okay. Well, it's even scarier than...
halfway around the world.
Oh. Okay, well, I'm just going to be really honest, I guess, about it. So it might not be very academic, but when I first heard about the Paris attack, we were all like at coffee house, and we were just like watching these performances happen, and my friend turned to me and told me, and it's weird because I don't remember 9/11, so I don't actually remember feeling that close to something, but like just like the dread and like I don't know, the feeling that it's like immediate. It's like it's right there. I don't know why. Like obviously we're here in Canada and like we're constantly safe, but my sister's in Europe right now and she's supposed to go to Paris soon, so immediately like my thoughts were like, wait, like how is that possible? Like she's going there, that's supposed to be like a safe place, and Paris in my mind has always been this like safe place, and then that kind of obviously got me thinking like, wait, how is this different from like any other killing that's happening in the world? Like how is that, like why doesn't that affect me in any other way? Like in that same way, I mean, like I don't know, I was just like, I'm very confused still, and like I'm not really scared anymore, but I'm just like wondering like, I'm kind of wondering like how I should feel about it. Like do I feel angry or no? And like what is the reason behind all of this? Like I feel like it's not very transparent to me. So it's like I'm a bundle of confusion.
there's a kind of thought experiment that I mean, I think you're making some sense. There's an interesting thought experiment. And it'd be an experiment to actually say, I'm going to put myself in the mind of the kid with the Kalashnikov, the AK-47, or with the bomb vest. What are they saying, They killed 129 people on Friday night. 129 people would be a good score on the average day in Aleppo 2 years ago. They were, that's what was going on. Barrel bomb would kill 129 people in one crack in Aleppo. So it is, as you say, this is everywhere. It came, and somehow Paris seems home. We're not talking about Beirut. Beirut came home. More people died in a Russian airliner, probably from the same thing. Paris is symbolic to us. Say Paris, London, New York. They probably represent for us the kind of apex of a kind of intervention, a kind of great Western city. All different. So we do see this, it's like flag burning or something. But it is, it's just, it's another string of murders on the part. We might just condemn young men for a while. It's just boys. It's a high school killing. It's a thing in a mall. It's in a movie theater. It's just that they had some story. That was their narrative. What the other narratives are, God knows. I suspect it's more than just a killing in the cinema. But I do think we have to see it in the context of a barrel bomb in Aleppo. I do think they see it in the context of a barrel bomb in Aleppo. So we probably have to at least engage in that experiment. But how many people are dead in Syria so far? I mean, there's 1.5 million, 2 million displaced, but I don't know how many 100,000 are dead. Nobody seems to know. I think we're up over 300,000, if not more. So, yeah, I think your rumination is appropriate.